Magandang umaga po. It's Tuesday, February 18, 2020. At kahapon, lumabas sa mga newspapers at naibalita rin sa television at radio na may ilang mga senador na pinapamunuan ni Senate President Tito Soto III at kasama na rin si Senate Minority Leader Franklin Drilon ay maghahain ng isang petition sa Supreme Court upang i-question yung pag-terminate ni Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte ng Visiting Forces Agreement. Sinabi ni Senator Drilon kagabi, kinausap daw siya ni Senate President Soto at tinanong kung sasama siya sa hakbang na ito at sinabi niya na yun naman talaga ang posisyon niya, na dapat kunin muna ng Pangulo ng Pilipinas ang concurrence o pagsang-ayon ng Senado tungkol sa tigil o pag-terminate ng Visiting Forces Agreement. Pero noong nakaraang Martes, 1 week ago, nagtalumpati si Senator Francis Tolentino sa Senado upang ipahayag ang kanyang panindigan na hindi kailangan ng Pangulo ng Pilipinas na humingi ng concurrence o pagsang-ayon sa pag-terminate ng VFA. Ito po ang pahayag ni Senator Tolentino na hindi masyado nabigyan ng pansin ng ating mainstream media at kahit siguro sa social media ay hindi nabigyan ng pansin. No? At napakahalaga ang mga sinabi dito ni Senator Tolentino na sa ibang mga bansa nagawa ng mga pangulo nila na i-terminate o umatras sa kung anumang mga international agreements na wala ng pahintulot o concurrence mula sa Senado. Kasi po yung requirement na mayroong concurrence na 2/3 vote mula sa Senado ay para lang sa pagpasok ng mga international agreements. Dahil po ito sa tinatawag na magkakaroon ng binding effect, magkakaroon ng obligasyon ang Pilipinas. Kaya po kinakailangan yung ratification or concurrence o pag-aproba ng Senado. Pero sa pag-atras o sa pag-terminate sa mga kasunduan na ito ay hindi na po kailangan. Nanindigan si Senator Tolentino na hindi dapat pakialaman ng Senado yung prerogative o kapangyarihan ng Pangulo na i-terminate to abrogate the VFA. Kasi nga po ito ay sang-ayon sa tinatawag na separation of powers. Iba po ang kapangyarihan ng executive, iba rin ang sa legislative, iba rin ang sa judiciary. At kung papakialaman ng Senado itong desisyon ng Pangulo na i-terminate yung VFA, ito po ay violation ng separation of powers. So pakinggan niyo po itong talumpati ni Senator Tolentino upang maintindihan natin kung bakit hindi kailangan yung tinatawag na concurrence at mali yung posisyon ni Senate President Tito Soto, Senator Drilon at iba pang mga senador na talagang namimilit na dumaan muna sa kanila ang kung anumang hakbang na i-terminate ang VFA. Ito po si Senator Tolentino.
Would like to recognize Senator Tolentino.
Senator Francis Tolentino is recognized. What is the pleasure of the gentleman?
Mr. President, just a manifestation relative to Senate Resolution number 312. Mr. President, had I been inside the session hall yesterday, I would have joined Senator De La Rosa in voting for abstention, Mr. President. And with the permission of this honorable body, allow me, Mr. President, to explain why I would have abstained in yesterday's vote.
Why you
Mr.
would have
President.
abstained? Yes,
Yes,
go ahead.
Mr.
Go ahead.
President. Mr. President, relative to the Visiting Forces Agreement, which from news reports reaching this representation was already officially terminated with the notification coming from the Department of Foreign Affairs Secretary. Let me explain my vote. The acts of each branch of government must not be controlled by or subjected to the influence of either branch because, Mr. President, such is the essence of separation of powers. My vote relative to Resolution 312 would have been to abstain, as mentioned earlier. Our republic is a sovereign and democratic state which is founded on the will of the people, which in turn endows our government with its vast and awesome powers. Maintaining their balance is the time-honored principle of separation of powers, which is enshrined in our 1987 Constitution, Mr. President. Now this principle was put to test, or is being put to test once again, as the country grapples with the recent developments in foreign and national security policies relative to the Visiting Forces Agreement, or the VFA. We are not, Mr. President, yesterday or today, we are not voting here for the retention or abrogation of the VFA. We are not voting here to determine whether the VFA is beneficial or detrimental to the country. What is at issue here is the separation of powers among three co-equal branches of government to maintain the balance required by the Constitution. Does the President have the power to abrogate a treaty under the 1987 Constitution? I say yes, Mr. President, considering the President's role as the chief architect of our nation's foreign policy. This includes the decision to terminate the existing Visiting Forces Agreement, a political process with regional and international consequences. This goes into the very essence of executive power, which is in Article 7, Section 1 of the 1987 Constitution, and is vested in the sole person of the President of the Philippines. The Constitution, Mr. President, is enduring, and upon its inception is intended to exist for ages. It governs the rights and obligations of the people, not only at this time or at the time of the framing, but also the far-reaching future. Its permanence protects the stability of fundamental rights and liberty. To quote President George Washington in his farewell address on 19 September 1796, and I quote, "The Constitution which any time exists, till changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory to all." It is without question, Mr. President, that by constitutional fiat and by intrinsic nature of his office, the head of state is the sole organ and authority in external affairs of the country, as the Supreme Court declared in Bayan versus Zamora, GR 138570, and Pimentel Jr. versus Executive Secretary. The U.S. case of Myers versus United States in 1926, 2722 U.S. 52, is instructive, as it tells us that Congress' power to remove or the right to participate in the exercise of a power given to the executive would infringe on the constitutional principle of separation of powers. The deference we give to the executive department is dictated by the principle of separation of powers. This principle is one of the cornerstones of our democratic government. It cannot be eroded without endangering the government, as stated by the Philippine Supreme Court in Secretary of Justice versus Lancion, GR 139465. Although the unilateral withdrawal from a treaty by the President is an apparent vacuum in the field of Philippine law, this has been done before in other jurisdictions. In a long line of cases, the United States dealt with the question of unilateral withdrawal in Goldwater versus Carter, 444 U.S. 996, on President Carter's termination of the Mutual Defense Treaty with Taiwan. In the case of Beacon Products versus Reagan, 814 Federal Reports 2D on Reagan's unilateral termination of the Treaty of Friendship with Nicaragua, and Kucinich versus Bush, 236 Federal Supplement 2D1 on the U.S. withdrawal from the 1972 Anti-Ballistics Missile Treaty. All these three cases ruled that in the light of the absence of any constitutional provision governing the termination of a treaty, and the fact that the different termination procedures may be appropriate for different treaties, the instant case, among others, must solely be controlled by political standards, and therefore, the challenge to the President's power vis-a-vis treaty termination raised a non-justiciable political question, Mr. President. Other prominent examples of unilateral withdrawal from treaties included the withdrawal of Indonesia from the United Nations in 1965, of Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland from UNESCO in the 1950s, of the Soviet Union and 8 Eastern European states from the World Health Organization in the same period. Even more recently, President Trump of the United States also withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal and the Paris Agreement on climate change. In sum, states have always operated in purview of their national interest and have withdrawn from international agreements without congressional interference. Can the Senate inquire, then, into the President's wisdom to abrogate a treaty? Mr. President, while I am of the opinion, collectively with the members of this chamber, that we should strengthen the powers of the Senate relative to foreign affairs, the reason why this is solely lodged with the President is by virtue of the Constitution and by reason of his office, that the President has access to the almost comprehensive and confidential diplomatic information and ultra-sensitive military intelligence data. What then is the Senate's role in treaty making? Section 21, Article 7, Section 25, Article 18 of the 1987 Constitution requires Senate concurrence to bind the state to such agreements. However, there is no similar provision requiring the same to abrogate a treaty. Our obligation lies not in the termination of treaties and international agreement, but in its creation. Requiring Senate concurrence in instances of abrogation is to create an obligation where no such judicial precedent or law exists. The constitutionally enumerated powers of Congress, Mr. President, circumscribe its authority to the exclusion of all. Expressum facit cessari tacitum. Mr. President, by interpretation or instruction, this may not be extended. To the members of this august body, I end this manifestation, albeit with sadness. Baka po sa mga darating na araw, wala nang tutulong tayo sa pag merong disaster, pero ganyan po siguro talaga ang tinatadhana ng ating saligang batas na dapat manaig ang desisyon ng Pangulo. To the members of this august body, I end my manifestation with a quote from George Washington as an allegory to our current predicament. And I quote, "It is important that the habits of thinking in a free country should inspire caution in those entrusted with its administration to confine themselves within their respective constitutional spheres, avoiding in the exercise of the power of one department to encroach upon another." Sana po ang yugtong ito ng kasaysayan na sa palagay ng iba ay mahirap sa kanila o mahirap sa hinaharap ay malagpasan natin sa tulong ng poong may kapal. Maraming salamat, Mr. President.